The plan for the session is to give my good friend Gretchen a chance to give us an idea of what she's seen in the gender space and what she's experienced. And I'll introduce her in a minute. And then I'm going to be talking to you about perceptions and what it really means and how it affects the whole gender equality process or issues. And I've got a case study that I've prepared for us that I'm going to run through, and I want to make this session quite interactive. I know all of you are hopefully now in a chill mood, but I do want to do breakout rooms because I do believe that there's often more wisdom in the room than the person presenting. And in this case, definitely so. So that's the plan. And then finally, I'm going to show you the link, how all of these things so I'm just going to keep admitting people as I'm carrying on. Welcome. How mentorship is a very important process, a change process, a transformation process in the gender equality space. So I think what I would like to do as a start is I'd like to introduce Gretchen to you. So Gretchen, if you don't mind putting on your camera, Gretchen has been a friend, first client and then friend of mine for many, many years. And she's a remarkable, remarkable person. If I start talking about her experience, I'm going to be spending all night just talking about her experience and exposure. And it was Gretchen that encouraged me to dabble in this whole gender equality challenge. And when I started thinking, okay, how do we do this? What do we need to talk about? Gretchen was, of course, as always, brilliant in just saying, listen, there's such a huge difference between the different environments. And I've put on the word developed and developing countries and environments, and whether you call it first world or third world. The point is all of us are still developing, and it brings additional complexities to this issue. So Gretchen can introduce herself further, and then we can, the idea is that we then can go into a quick breakout room where you can share a little bit maybe of your own story, of what brings you here and why is this a topic of interest for you. And then we'll come back and I'll be talking to you about that case study that we've discovered. So from my side, Gretchen, I'd like to, let me just change this. I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you, and thanks for the grand introduction. So I think there are more people who are listening that have greater experience than I do. So for me, really, I'm just going to go with sort of a very I've had to pull myself when you said to me you wanted me to say something, like what am I going to say, right? Pull myself up and actually look at it from a broad holistic perspective. So I'm currently, for those of you who can't see my background image, with a sustainability consulting advisory firm who are in the environmental, social governance and sustainability consulting world. And in effect, what we are doing primarily focused on the financial sector. So we do work for very large investors who are who are investing into the emerging markets primarily, so Asia and Africa. And with a very strong environmental, social, and governance lens. And my role in the consulting firm, and this is after, 35 plus years of working in human resource management in corporate, and so sort of pulling myself out, my role in the firm is to I'm leading on the what we call job quality, which in our terms, that will be human resources, job quality and gender work streams that fall under the S in ESG and social governance. So I've had the fortunate sort of ability to have been so embedded in South Africa's environment. And those of you who can't shoot through your laptops can blame me later on. But I was involved in wherever, and I won't tell you when it was, with the Canadian Human Rights Commission in a working group in crafting out the employment equity legislation. With a view to looking at how to implement transformation in South Africa. And you know, it was 2 years in a working group, and the intentions were honorable. And for me, at that point, it's really, really clear to see the difference between the developed countries and the emerging economies, right? And in a way, South Africa adopted and implemented a framework, which was unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, became a legislative requirement through the Employment Equity Act, and then obviously through the economic pressure through the Black Economic Empowerment scorecard process. But the intention was really around transformation and, as we know, diversity, equality, and inclusion. And the gender agenda was not, it was there, but it was sort of integrated. It was really around transformation from a racial perspective. And I think that first and foremost, that is something that is really evident in where we're sitting today in South Africa, with the focus being transformation on race, gender being second priority, and of course, I think disability being a really difficult one. That's for a different conversation. So yes, there's been massive transformation. It was implemented, and as I say, fortunately, unfortunately, in my mind, what was viewed originally as punitive, because it was, you have to do it in enforcement, etc. I think we've kind of moved on from that. But the starting point for me in South Africa was one of, it's legislation, you're going to do this, we have to transform, you're going to do that, right? And maybe that's fundamentally what the difference is between where we are sitting in South Africa now to what I'm experiencing in the emerging markets. And in the emerging markets, what has happened there is that there is, in a way, a really clean slate. Now, I don't say clean slate positively, because there are human rights violations, which are really scary. And but there is not this sort of predisposed framework that you must implement from a punitive measure. What is happening in the emerging markets is that there is a very strong trend and movement towards gender, and it's really called sort of focusing on gender lens investing. But if you look at risk mitigation, you'll be talking about social safeguarding, gender-based violence and harassment, and then, you know, and really the encouragement and the sort of enticement is around funding, because it's been driven by the large sort of development funding institutes, World Bank, etc., who are really focused on gender transformation and inclusion. And so there is a sort of a carrot that is there, and you've got a situation in where there's an opportunity to use a fantastic framework which has been developed by, you may or may not have heard of the 2X Global 2X framework, but it's a globally accepted framework which is far more holistic than the than our Employment Equity Act ever was. And it looks at how you can possibly consider gender integration and strengthening gender within your workforce. So, and it starts fundamentally with a commitment from your owners around, you know, gender, supporting gender, strengthening considerations, be it simply just having sexual harassment policies, but moving the needle from gender harassment policies into how can you employ more women, what kind of gender-friendly policies exist, etc. But what is so exciting about that market is that, in a way, we're starting in the right place. We are starting with the ownership level, who are committing themselves to gender transformation, who are fundamentally sort of really wanting to move that needle. Yes, absolutely, it might be due to funding, but there is also a very strong business case that's coming through, and we are seeing more and more of this. So it's actually really a slate to start with, and any small achievement around gender is, in fact, some form of improvement. In the South African context, there was sort of a legislative framework. It definitely has moved the needle. There is no question about it. It has come with its challenges around being punitive, around the frustrations. I think we've moved on a lot since then, Mariheca, and I think we are finding ourselves, feeling more. There's a lot more sort of understanding of how do we deal with workplace bias, etc. However, I do think that there are still challenges. And I think we're sitting in this blockage at the moment, which is exactly the point, that I reached in my career in corporate around how do I really do, and this is for me the key, sustainable gender transformation, and not because it's required due to legislation, and not because it is the in thing to do, but because it's about diversity, and it really is about sustainability, and it's about really optimizing, harnessing, and getting the best value out of a business. And it is the starting point for me, which is what I thought was something we could reflect on. That has really, sort of, it is something we're grappling with in South Africa, and how do we deal with that? And I'd love to hear more from all of you around your thoughts. But looking at what is happening in the emerging market, looking at the work that we're involved with, and I've got a couple of my colleagues on the call, and happy for them to add their value in the breakaways. But it is really, for me, I think, quite encouraging. It's not nice to see human rights violations, and the socio-cultural contexts are massively important, right? In Pakistan, trying to implement gender transformation, you've got to be innovative. You've got to look at ways of doing it without breaking the whole social ecosystem. But we're doing it. It's happening. And so it's those little steps, and it's happening through sort of from a very
Gretchen? She's frozen now. Okay. I don't know what happened, Gretch, but you were in the middle of her sentence and then you
Sorry, I don't know what happened. It's one of those. But in a way, so what I'm saying is that it's really about the starting point for me, and where do we find ourselves now, and reflecting back, and how can we navigate what we have. Mm-hmm. So I mean that in a nutshell is sort of my overview, and I would welcome any comments or any input from anyone.
Okay, so what I would like us to do next is I am gonna, and I know for some of you, you're gonna ask me first, but it is part of what we do, right? I'm gonna put you in your breakout rooms, small groups, very small groups. Please just introduce yourself, and the question to answer is, what brings you here? To join a call on gender equality means there's something in it for you, and something that's important in it for you. So what brings you here? And then maybe just some thoughts around it. I'm going to give you 5 minutes just to connect with the people in your little groupie, and then we're going to come back, and then we can start talking about the next topic. So, sorry, I'm just trying to. So how this works for those of you that haven't been part of the breakout rooms before is you're going to receive a link, and we are going to have 4 breakout rooms. So there will be about 2 or 3 people. So everybody will have to participate in your room, and 5 minutes, just introduce yourself. What brings you here? Why is it that this is a topic for discussion for you? What are you curious about? Hello.
Then we were chatting.
That was very rude. That was very, very,
So
very
sorry.
rude. We were in the middle of hearing some juicy information.
I'm so sorry. I'll give you a
Nasty.
chance again, I promise. I hate doing that, but thanks so much for participating. So lovely. There were quite a few people that joined while you guys were in your breakout room, so I gave you guys a bit extra time just to introduce yourselves. But now I would like to move on to the next question. But I wonder, is there? Yeah, maybe let's do this. Let's do this. I'm going to share my screen again because I want to share the slide that I've got in front of me. And then what I would like to do is run through a particular case study that talks about that we've done that shows quite a few interesting observations in the data that we received. And the question that I'm going to ask you afterwards is, from these results, what can we recommend? So I would love for you to throw in your ideas around how do we change these the data? How do we change the stories that we have in the workplace? So what I'm going to do is, let me just put this up for us. I'm going to share my slides and I'm going to run through the data with you. And I'm going to do it very, very briefly, but I'll give you a summary at the end. So don't stress if you feel like, this is too much information. I'll give you a summary at the end. Okay, so don't worry about that. But we have to start talking about the real issues that we do observe. And one of the things that I've learned from Gretchen is it's one thing to be in your head about the compliances and about ticking the boxes, about the governance and all these beautiful things, but we need to start looking at what's going on in the heart and what is the stories that we tell ourselves. And unfortunately, some of these stories that we tell ourselves are so deeply, deeply embedded in our psyche. So I came across a brilliant piece of research that actually just blew me away completely not too long ago. There was a study done with in various large cities in the world where people would take, where the students would take a jar of sweets or jelly beans, like that's one, and would say to the people, any random people walking past on a corner in a city, and say, what is it? How many sweets do you think are in this jar? And what was fascinating was that each person that participated had the opportunity to guess, but they could listen to 3 different voices that would give them clues on the answer. And of course, there was a prize that they could win, and etc., etc. So there was lots of motivation, was fairly asked, and it was totally random. So then what happened is what they discovered, which was absolutely fascinating, across the world, in these different cities that they approached, with random people from different genders, from different backgrounds, from different races, all of these beautiful things, completely diverse people. The voices that they could choose were also on the spectrum, from different kinds of backgrounds, etc., highly diverse. Every single time, the participant would choose as an option the voice of a older white male. And every time they chose the voice of the older white male as the correct answer to give them a clue on how many sweets there are in the jar. That study completely shook me, because what you can take away from it is exactly what you can take, little facey, what you can take away from that study is that doesn't matter in the world where you are at the moment, with our legacies that we're living with the history that we've had for hundreds of years. That story is so deeply ingrained in our being and in our psyche. And if we want to change the world and the way we live and try to get some sort of sustainability, and health and organizations and a better world will have to start changing the psyche. We have to start changing the perceptions that we have about what is true and what is not true. So I would like to share this case study, and my passion is to look at numbers and look at data, measure, see what's going on, and then to develop processes that can shift it. And what I've learned over the past 20 years, for those of you that don't really know me, I've been in the organizational development space for most of my career. And what I've learned is once there is some awareness, so once you've created clarity on what is going on and you've got concrete data to show this is what's going on, and it's no longer something that the elephant in the room or something that we suspect, but you've got the data. The moment you've got the awareness, you can shift it, and it changes the moment you pay attention. The awareness for me comes from asking questions and getting the relevant answers, or getting the answers with relevant questions rather. And the reason why we work with perception is because of exactly this example that I gave you now. Perception drives behavior. The stories we tell ourselves drive our behavior. I'd like to share my story, and I've never done this before, but I'm going to do it. So when Gretchen approached me a few years ago and said, listen, you've got the self-perception tool, why don't you just look at developing something that talks to gender and gender perception and how we can shift it? We've got to put some data to it. And with her passion and her insights and her wisdom, I totally understood the challenge. But it wasn't until quite recently that I discovered that I was able to take the head story to the heart. And the reason is, I think each and every one of us, doesn't matter in which society we grew up in, and specifically as a woman, I've grown up with a story around what your role is as a girl. Okay, and I've got 3 brothers, and I've got my parents. I've spoken to them earlier on my way here, and great relationship, very different couple, but I've been very privileged to grow up in a sort of normal family. But yet what I've learned, and now you've got to ask yourself, where does this come from? What I've learned from childhood, and I think each and every one of you would have had a story like that. In schools, in the workplace, in our families, is that girls, you've got to behave in a certain way. And if you want to be seen, there's certain things that you'll have to do. And there are certain hoops you'll have to jump through. And for you to be accepted in this world that you live in, you'll have to change. And what really shook me when I went through the data of this case study is how my story was evident in the data. And this basic thing of self-acceptance, for example, how it plays out in the workplace. So if we can start looking at that, the story of the organization and of the individuals in the organization, and I'm not talking about only about the women's perception, but also the men's perception. So I'm just going to talk about women and men to keep it simple. The men's perception on themselves, of themselves, and reflecting on how they see women and vice versa. And that's the pieces of data that I'm going to show you. So when I show you the slides, you're first going to get a mini heart attack and think, what is this woman doing? Why is she giving us so many bars to look at? But I'll talk you through it, and then you'll see very quickly. And I'll show you what to look at. So when we look at data, we want to make sure that we start seeing patterns. And once we start seeing the patterns, we start seeing the golden thread that represents the story. And if we can share, we can reflect back that story, we can hold up that mirror, we create awareness, and then the story starts changing. Okay, so let me do this. Okay, so The tool comes from the research, the model that I developed in my research when I did a PhD, which was all about buy-in intervision, and we've adapted it to the gender story. And the first construct, so there are 6 constructs I'm going to talk through, and there are 50 items, 50 items that were measured. And what I want you to do now is, all I want you to do is just look at the dark blue in the different items. That is the collective perception of men of themselves, okay? The light blue is the woman's perception of the men. So when you compare the 2 blues, we're comparing, so for those of you that don't do colors, it's the first line and the second line, okay? So the first and the second lines are the men lines. And then we've got a green and a light green. And the green line, that's the third column, or bar rather. That's women data collectively, okay? And then the last one is how men perceive the women. And what I want you to see, unfortunately, I cannot share the client and where the data comes from, but I do want to explain to you how we can take specific pieces of data out of this. Of course, you can take every single item and digest it and analyze it and try to get into it, but we want to pick up certain themes of what is going on here. And how can we shift it? And how will this typically play out in a work environment? So in this first construct, what we look at is all about what is it that we bring as a contributor. So in other words, not just in our work environment, but also at home and family, whatever. But so what is it that you offer? When you show up, what is it that you show up with, and how do you feel about it? So all these items can pretty much link to confidence drivers. And what I want you to notice immediately when you look at it is that you'll see that the men's perceptions of themselves easily, collectively get a 4 out of 4, which is absolutely yes on the item that was measured. Okay, and then what I want you to see is that the women's data, so in other words, the third item, the darkish green item, I've got some items where they feel quite confident, but it's a lot less than what you see with the men. Okay, and this theme carries throughout the data. But there's continuously a story of, men seems to be, in this organization, seems to be far more confident about what they've got to offer and how they come across. Okay. But the items that I would like to indicate tonight as issues talks around number 3 and 4, which is about self-acceptance. And the reason why we identify it as an issue is when there's a big gap between either how you perceive yourself or how you are being perceived around the other, or if the scores are generally both low or all of it is low. And what we notice here is the lack of self-acceptance, not only in the women, which is very low, but also there's some serious issues around self-acceptance with men, which plays out in the next construct too, which was a bit of a surprise. And then again, colleagues' acceptance, and not really thinking there's colleague acceptance from women looking at me and thinking, they don't really accept us. So that self-acceptance story that I was referring to earlier plays out clearly. In the next construct, so I'm going to run through these things, and then you're welcome to throw in questions, and I'm going to ask you that question on what you think could be a potential solution. So this construct is pretty much, so when we talk about self-confidence, it's our projected selves, while self-esteem is closer to the true self, and when we're alone, this is who we are, right? So this is in our close circle where we feel most vulnerable. What I appreciated about uh, this particular construct was the honesty around vulnerability. But what I want to focus on specifically is, remember what I said to you just now about the self-esteem items, and that's a deep sense of, will I be okay? And the women in this particular organization clearly says, no, I'm worried, I'm not sure, and it correlates beautifully with how they feel about their economic value and economic worth. Okay. The irony is that men tend to, and we know this through other research, men tend to be able to ask for money a lot easier than what women do. And in this particular case, if you look at number 14, which is the fourth set of bars, what you'll notice, the way the men perceive women about asking for money is higher than what they do themselves. So, and that absolute willingness to say, can you pay me more? And what we know is that when women ask for money, they tend to ask at least 10% less than what men do in a financial position. So that pay gap is still very, very real. And I believe is very much linked that the story around, what am I truly worth? What am I truly contributing? Is it as good as I think it is, or is it still being dissed? Okay. So the next construct is about connection. So the idea behind is to say, I can be amazing and bring wonderful things, but if I don't work on my distribution network, the way that I'm going to make things happen, I'm not going to be successful. What is very, very interesting, of course, is how women perceive themselves as connectors, while they don't really see the men in this particular organization as connectors, which can be something really serious to work with. But what is upsetting, or not great, is in this particular case, women's lack of connecting with superiors or people with rank, people with authority. And that's still that old story of what I said to you before about the older white male voice that we still have. And I personally, I can remember when I was at varsity, my huisvader said to me, you know, you've got a serious problem with authority. And the reason why I said that, we still connect on Facebook and wherever, so it's not that I'm bad-mouthing him. But the reason why I said that was I didn't agree with something that he suggested. So the disagreement is seen as an issue with authority. So I would like to go on to the next one, and that's all linked with how do we communicate. So now we've built this beautiful network, we work in a team, we come up with great ideas, but how do we communicate? What I loved about what I saw in this particular set of slides is that the men were able, so that's the light green line right at the end, it's a big off. So, but what happened is that across the board in general, apart from the first one, which is self-expression, clarity. So I think means sometimes things women faff too much, but across the board, the men felt that the women were far better communicators than what they are, and the women agreed with that, of course. And the listening skills, of course, with the men was a big issue. And while women tend to be much better at that, and their adaptiveness of their communication. What I found fascinating, if you look at number 30, in that particular case, the women didn't really feel like they were adapting so well. So that means it's about the relatedness and making sure people get you and you're being understood. However, the men felt that they were amazing at adapting to the various level and different individuals. So it's not like my style is my style and take it or leave it. Let me see something. Okay. So what was also very interesting is that the men felt, so look at number 34, men felt that they do not sell themselves well. And there's again that asking for money story. While they felt that the women do a great job. So there's a disconnect in terms of some of these perceptions, which makes it worth our while to have a conversation about it, right? This construct is about problem solving and coming up with creative ideas. And what I want to say to you, and I've seen this a few times now, is that overall men tend to think that women are a lot better at solving problems and coming up with ideas, but they do not share it often enough. And I believe if we can learn to be more confident and communicate, use our communication skills as women better, to share these ideas so that you truly do connect and that you do not get intimidated for whatever reason, or that you don't become rebellious or aggressive unnecessarily, etc., etc., or you can work with these different challenges. I do believe that we could add a lot more value than what we are adding as women. Okay? And then the last construct in this scenario was quite funny, because this construct talked about how do we create the support that we need to get where we need to go. And we put an addiction management as one of the items that we've got to manage, because what we find is, especially if there's an environment where there's a lot of abuse, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of drama, then addiction shoots up. But in this particular case, what is interesting is the perception that women had around the men, which basically said they might be drinking too much coffee, or I don't know what. So maybe there's like a boys' club, I don't know. But overall, in this particular case, the self-manage was actually quite good, apart from some of the health habits that the men had. But this construct wasn't a big deal. I think the other constructs gave us a lot more insight. So it's quite a mouthful. And I want you, when I read through these now and go with it through with you, I'm going to break you up in little groups, and then I'm going to ask everyone to just add to the group if you don't mind. I'm just aware of the time. But what I would like to say is what I found fascinating is that whole basic thing of acceptance, self-acceptance and acceptance of other, the awareness of the poor self-esteem of women and then also of men. Men being far more confident to ask for money. And so there's that question that sort of hangs, are we worth our wealth? So for us to equalize in the workplace as women equalize, to become equal in the workplace from a financial point of view, we first have to admit our worthiness. And I think we need to figure out a way to do this without struggling so much. I've had a scenario last week where one of the HR managers contacted me and said, I've got a brilliant offer from someone else, but I don't want to leave the company that I'm with. But so how do I do this? And this lady, I said to her, okay, so reach out to the HR group, HR head, and have a conversation. And she said, when I give my resignation. And so instead of going and saying, can you offer me something else? Because this is an opportunity, but I would like some, can you match it or something like that? Her immediate response was, when do I do it? When I resigned. and yesterday I heard a story of a guy that got an offer from someone else, and before he didn't even blink before he went back to his current employer and said, you need to pay me more, otherwise I'm going to jump. He ended up staying without getting more money. But the point is that level of confidence, arrogance, I don't know, is just shocking. The gap between it. Then, of course, that this disconnection of women with men in authority, that link and what it represents is something that's concerning for me. And then I think there's an opportunity where women know they are strong communicators and men know women are good communicators, and they're aware of their own struggle, and to see how can we work with this in this particular case. And then the problem solving thing, but men knowing that women are not challenging solutions given to them, so they take the authority. That was a bit more in the detail. Okay, so these were some of the items that were identified, and if you guys are comfortable with it, I'm going to give you 5 minutes just to have a look, or maybe a little bit less, 3 minutes, to say what struck you about this. And what would you, if you were in this particular organization, where would you, from the findings, where would you start? What would you tackle? What would you do? So I'd love to hear your opinions. I'd love to hear some of your views. But for me, I think it is just fascinating to see how clearly the data can tell the story. Where's my thing now? Okay, so I'm going to open up the breakout room to see. So sorry, you guys. I hate bringing people back while they're chatting.
We landed up wasting time trying to figure out what the message was. It's like 10 seconds for what? What was happening?
Well, welcome back. Welcome back. So everybody, thank you so much for participating. I'm realizing we're running out of time, and I think I was planning to talk to you about mentorship and the role that plays in these sort of processes, but I'll rather leave that for another day, because we can't rush it. The bottom line is there's amazing work being done. We've been monitoring mentorship processes over the past 2 decades, where it's been absolutely fantastic how it's transformed people's lives, and specifically around gender equality, inclusion processes and things like that, and completely changing cultures. But I love to hear some comments. So if you have time to make comments, and yeah, I'd love to do a follow-up. If people are interested, we can definitely do that. And I think I agree. So I would love, is there anybody else that's got something that they want to really share in this forum now? I don't know, let me see who's in that group. Stella, you and Nicole were together. Is there something specific that you'd like to add? Yes.
Yeah, I think Nicole's got her hand up.
Great.
Yeah, so Stella, by all means, chip in. But I think what's quite important, I like the idea of using the data. So I enjoy data myself. And I probably have 1,000 questions related to the data, which I won't fire off right now. But what I said was the data allows for a good segue to conversation. And the disconnect between perceptions is an interesting dialogue. It does allow for an honest conversation, because it kind of puts a different spin on the conversation, because the individuals realize, hang on, what I'm perceiving isn't actually what other people are perceiving. And why is that? They'll start to question. I don't think enough people reflect on the fact that perceptions are often different. So I really did enjoy the fact that the data was there to support the conversation, and it's something we should be using more when we're initiating transformation. Through dialogue, you change thinking, like you said. And what a nice way to start it up, get them to participate and then get them to reflect. So yeah, I quite wanted to just state that. Stella, you're welcome to add on.
No, I totally agree with Nicole, and look, one could sit and brainstorm this for quite some time, and we don't have the time. But I think one of the things that and it's not an easy fix. There are other processes that one can put in place as well that support it, but I think that the important thing is that men and women in an organization must learn to focus on the outcome and the solution in the situation. And we've got to learn to put our egos at the door, right? And women have certain natural attributes, as do men. And what we've got to do is also learn. We know when we work in a team. I know that I have strengths in certain areas, and my colleagues have strengths in other areas. And so you leverage on those, right? And that's what men and women in business have to do. They need to learn to leverage off the other gender's attributes, okay, and stop fighting against it. And seeing it as a challenge and seeing it as a threat. And that to me is the biggest problem. It's a threat. And the minute you have one individual, whether it's the male or a female, putting up the defensive wall with a threat, it automatically creates a reaction in the other one. So, you know, one has got to work through that and identify where it's happening. And as Nicole said, a large part of that is self-awareness and personal insight. You know, what drives my behavior to behave like that.
Which actually, sorry, Stella, which actually backs the fact of the earlier comment around female to female as well. So the more people understand to accept individuality, the better, I think.
Yeah. And that's maybe the skill that needs to be developed. You know, how do we do that? Thank you so much for all the comments. Really cool and wonderful. And I think what I'll do from our side is we'll set up another date. And I'd love to share how we do the dialoguing in the mentorship process, because what that makes, how it really creates a huge transformational thing is usually what we do is we do the older male and the young female and vice versa if there are enough women in the organization. But the change in the difference in the mentor and mentee and no direct reports, and it works incredibly well because it allows people to see each other and to truly start having that relatedness, but having empathy and compassion with someone that's so different from yourself. And so I'd love to share some of those stories and some of that information that we've gathered over the years. So if you're comfortable with that, I'll do that. I'll set something up for us. Is there anybody that would like to add to what has been said? It's been so, I can do this the whole evening, so please don't let me waste your time. Yes, Colleen, please.
Good evening. Thank you for that very interesting take on the gender issue. I actually looked at your data, and what I found very interesting was item 17 on managing abuse. And it was interesting to look at how men actually identify with the fact that they don't deal with abuse very well, while they also look at give females a higher rating, that they're able to deal with abuse well. So that to me, I don't know, but to me that is just a little bit of throwing abuse or the perceptions thereof, that females should actually deal with abuse. Can it deal with abuse? Sorry, my camera is not very good. So, okay, you can see me. Females don't deal with abuse very well, but at least females deal with abuse better than we can.
Yeah, it's almost like
so they must deal with it. That's the message I get from the data, that particularly that item.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So what typically happens in the organizations we get involved with on this with these sort of processes is the individual. Thank you for your comment. We are put in a position where we can talk about this in a private conversation with your mentor and your mentee, where these topics come up, and then we can delve into this. And it's amazing how those stories starts changing them. So thank you for picking up on that. I'd love to continue the conversation, and what I'll do next time is I'll give it a little bit more time. So I think from my side, I need to let all of you go. Some people have already had to drop off, but thank you so much for showing up and being part of this and playing along. And please stay in touch. Please reach out. And if you want more information from our side, Nicole and my assistant, is more than willing to send you more information and continue our conversations offline. Have a beautiful evening and keep warm for those of you who are freezing in South Africa. And I look forward to setting up the next session. Bye-bye.